Hi, it's Katrina. Number 10. Fear of the Walking Dead. Anyone who has a deep-rooted fear of zombies would never make it a day in ancient Greece. The Greeks were unbelievably obsessed with the living dead, even though these are the very people who gave us some of the most logical minds and rational thinkers. They were all quite hysterically nonsensical when it came to zombies. And yes, we have evidence of it. Archaeologists have uncovered multiple instances of ancient Greeks burying people in such a way that they can never rise from the dead. They would weigh them down with rocks, pile their corpses with fragments of pottery, whatever they thought would work to keep the body pinned inside its tomb. The Greeks feared that if they didn't do this, certain dead individuals would rise from their grave and terrorize the living. Dr. Carrie Sulowski-Weaver from the University of Pittsburgh says the Greeks are an excellent example of an ancient culture that embraced the supernatural. They truly did believe that corpses could become reanimated, but they didn't think of zombies as roaming across the world in great hordes and wiping out civilization. Instead, zombies to the Greeks were agents of death. They were thought to slink through the shadows to prey on unsuspecting victims, usually as revenge for something that happened in life. Necrophobia, a fear of the dead, was very much present in ancient Greece. Number 9. Naked at the gym. The ancient Greeks loved to hit the gym. In Athens, over 2,000 years ago, the people were just as enthusiastic about getting into shape as people are today, maybe even more so. But there was one thing about going to the gym in Greece back then that would not be politically correct these days. First of all, the gym wasn't always just about working out. According to Eric Chalene, who wrote a book on the history of gyms, the gym was a place for artists and the political. The enlightened Greek could go to the gym and discuss life, culture, and the gods with his fellow enlightened friends. While all this was going on, the men were completely naked. The word gymnasium translates to school for naked exercise. Yes, I'm serious. There wasn't anything weird about this to the Greeks. They had a special kind of admiration for the naked human body and preferred to practice sports and stay in shape without any clothes on. They were positively obsessed with the male form and would prance around in the nude with all their pals in open-air gymnasiums without a care in the world. But the free spirit of the Greeks would die with the Romans and be ripped apart by the Middle Ages. The Romans didn't believe it was good to obsess over the body or one's physical appearance. They also didn't like how the Greeks were so willing to satiate their physical desires. As Christianity took hold, by the Middle Ages, the body became a thing to be feared, a toxic thing used only for immoral pleasures. Even in modern days, we are a long way off from openly naked gyms like the Greeks. Number 8. Heraclitus and the cow's dung. Heraclitus of Ephesus was a Greek philosopher in the 6th century BC. He was an arrogant man, allegedly an influence of both Plato and Aristotle, and was famous for presenting his best ideas in the form of riddles. Fun, right? But Heraclitus, as the years went on, became a little deranged and a little lost in his philosophy. He started to hate other people's company, then retreated into the mountains like a hermit. While living out his final days as a crazy old man in the mountains, Heraclitus began to suffer from a mysterious ailment. He suffered from an accumulation of fluid in the body. Unsure exactly how to treat it, he decided to cover himself completely in cow dung. The idea was that the heat from the dung would make the fluid inside his body evaporate. What Heraclitus didn't count on was that he would get trapped in the pile of dung as if he'd stepped into quicksand. Stuck, completely helpless, and up to his neck in cow dung, Heraclitus was then attacked by some stray dogs and killed. He tried to fix his own sickness and instead was eaten by dogs. It's important to note that this may not be historically accurate. Nobody can say for certain how the famous philosopher died. Some scholars say the whole story about him dying from fluid accumulation was an ironic twist on his teachings. Something about the death of the soul when it turns into water. Either way, ancient Greeks had some strange ideas about medicine and cow dung. Number 7. Spartan training. Sparta was a Greek city-state. In ancient Greece, the country was made up of many individual city-states, none subservient to the other. Athens was its own city-state, and so was Sparta. But Sparta was vastly different from Athens. Whereas their Athenian neighbors were busying themselves with politics and philosophy, the Spartans were busy training warriors. It was thanks to the Battle of Thermopylae in 480 BC that the Persians never conquered Greece, and that battle was only a handful of Spartans against the vastly superior Persian army. Many of the Greek city-states had perfectly fine armies, but Sparta's army was recognized as being the best. They achieved this greatness because of their education and training systems. They used harsh and often cruel methods to prepare young Spartan boys to grow up to be good citizens and ruthless soldiers. It was called the agoge or the agoge, and it's hard to imagine 7-year-olds today going through such a violent and exhausting trial. Parents these days would see it as a traumatic and frightening experience, but it was what made Sparta great. According to the Greek historian Plutarch, Spartans began to develop their soldiers immediately after birth. Male infants would be evaluated by elders, and only those considered sturdy were allowed to live. The rest were deemed unfit to be Spartans and were left at the foot of a mountain to perish. At the age of 7, the boys were turned over to the state. It was like boot camp where the boys lived and trained together. They studied, fought each other, and the most skilled soon became captain and was able to give orders. Through their training and education, Spartan boys turned into men who could endure more than any other Greek. They were also dedicated to Sparta, and this upbringing resulted in one of the most stable political entities in world history. Sparta's politics never floundered because everyone grew up with a strict sense of community and cooperation. Sparta only fell when they were forced to join the rest of Greece after they got ganged up on in 192 BC. Number 6. Well babies. Sadly, Spartans weren't the only ones in ancient Greece who threw away unwanted babies. In ancient Athens, it was totally normal for somebody to throw a human infant down a well if they died shortly after birth. Back then, it was seen as nothing more than throwing something away. It's pretty horrific, but the Greeks didn't see anything wrong with it. Evidence of this terrifying practice was discovered in the 1930s. Archaeologists excavated the Athenian Agora marketplace in the city center. They found all kinds of buried temples, fantastic statues, and a mysterious well carved into the rock. They were hoping to find more statues and relics at the bottom of the well, but instead came across 450 infant skeletons. At first, the experts couldn't fathom the idea of throwing away babies. They believed there had been some kind of mass sickness that wiped out hundreds of infants. It wasn't until later that researchers agreed the well had been a garbage dump for the recently deceased. The thing is that in Greek society, nobody was considered a real person until about 10 days after their birth, when they had a special ceremony. And so, if a baby died due to natural causes after being born, they were almost never buried properly or even grieved for. They would just be tossed down the local well or left at the dump. Number 5. Sacrificed to Zeus. The ancient Greeks may have done a little more human sacrifice than previously believed. We know the Aztec, the Inca, and the Maya were all fans of sacrificial rituals, but it's not really something that turns up in Greek history. However, a recent discovery on Mount Lycaon is changing our whole perspective on Greek sacrifice. The cold remains of a male teenager were found at the mountaintop, a spot which we know was popular with worshippers of the god Zeus. It was at the top of this mountain where an ash altar was erected to Zeus, the god of gods. The altar was excavated in 2006, but no human remains were initially found. Those didn't come until much later. Now researchers are wondering just how many other sites in ancient Greece were used for the ritual killing of a person. It could be that the Greeks were a lot more bloodthirsty than anyone ever imagined. Number 4. Flat stone toilet paper. If you've ever wondered what it was like living in ancient Greece, replace your toilet paper with a broken dish from your cupboard and you'll have your answer. According to French anthropologist Philippe Charlier's new study on toilet hygiene in the classical era, the Greeks used flat stones or pieces of ceramic to clean their bottoms. The theory is based on small discs found near ancient latrines with residue still stuck to them from thousands of years ago. There are also images on ancient Greek cups that appear to show people using such stones to wipe their behinds. This is quite different from what the Romans did with their public bathrooms. They used something called a tersorium, which was a sponge tied to a long stick. People would use it to clean themselves, with dozens of people all sharing the same stick. They would give it a brief rinse with vinegar water or salt water, then pass it on to their neighbor. The Greeks went in a totally different direction with their toilet etiquette. They used rocks to scrape away unwanted residue instead of a comfortable soft sponge. Number 3. The Mellified Man. Soaking a human cadaver in honey was widely practiced in China in the 16th century. It's called mellification, and it was a way for old people to donate their body to science. The idea supposedly came from an Arabic recipe, a very old tradition in which a recently dead person would have their body transformed into medicine. The process was gruesome at best and involved turning a human body into a mummified candy bar. To make things even more gruesome, to yield the best results, the mellification process typically started while the individual was still alive. The person would eat nothing but honey as they reached their final days. They would even bathe in the honey, and before long, honey accumulated inside the body, and then the person died. After their death, they would be buried in a stone coffin filled to the brim with honey. The coffin was then closed for about 100 years. The honey would preserve the body and turn it into a sugary glob of confection. Then the mummified human candy apple was cut into pieces and sold at markets as medicine. People used this stuff to treat wounds, bone fractures, sicknesses, and even ate it as a treat. And although this was most popular in China in the 16th century, it started way before that in ancient Assyria, and it may have been practiced by the Greeks as well. The Greek historian Herodotus wrote of the practice in the 4th century BC. There were also rumors that Alexander the Great was buried in a honey-filled sarcophagus. Number 2. Kicking out the politicians. If you didn't like a politician in ancient Greece, you could get together with your friends and vote to have them ostracized. Ancient Greek democracy was such a new and exciting thing that if the public hated a politician enough, they could have them banned from Greece forever. This was popular for a brief moment in time. From between 487 and 416 BC, Athenians were encouraged to banish whoever they wanted without a trial. It was the opposite of a popularity contest. And according to historian James Sickinger from Florida State University, its origins were completely humble. In order to prevent any tyrants from taking root in the democratic system, Greeks were given the power to kick out unwanted politicians. The historical records from ancient Greece show that it happened at least a dozen times. A candidate only needed roughly 6,000 votes cast against them. This was considered enough hate in Athenian democracy for a politician to be ostracized. The issue became that Athenians could not agree on anything. If even just a small group hated what one politician was doing, they could have that person kicked off the team. It became a major problem because after almost a century, nothing was getting done. Nobody could agree on what the right course was, and so ancient Greece had to change their system to something a little more like what we have today. Number 1. Not worth his salt. Ancient Greece was not nearly as civilized as many people think. One major aspect of Greek society that nobody wants to talk about is the fact that they practiced slave trading. Slaves were a major part of Greek culture, just as they were with the Romans. It was perfectly acceptable in ancient Greece to purchase human beings from foreign states and treat them as livestock. Even more disturbing is just how the Greeks would pay for their slaves. One of the most popular payment methods was salt. Because salt was such a scarce commodity, it could be used for everything from paying a soldier for their work to purchasing another human being. The expression, "not worth his salt," came from ancient Greek slave markets when people refused to pay salt for an individual they viewed as undesirable. Thanks for watching. Do you think you could have survived in ancient Greece? Let me know in the comments below, and remember to subscribe if you haven't already. See you next time. Bye!